Brighton Rock, Part 2, Chapter 1. The boy stood with his back to Spicer, staring out across the dark wash of the sea. They had the end of the pier to themselves. Everyone else at that hour, and in the weather, was in the concert hall. The lightning went on and off above the horizon, and the rain dripped. "Where have you been?" the boy asked. "Walking around," Spicer said. "You been there?" "I wanted to see it was all safe, that there wasn't anything you'd forgotten," the boy said slowly, leaning out across the rail into the doubtful rain. "When people do one murder, I've read they sometimes have to do another, to tidy up." The word murder conveyed no more to him than the word box, collar, giraffe. He said, "Spicer, you keep away from there." The imagination hadn't awoken. That was his strength. He couldn't see through other people's eyes or feel with their nerves. Only the music made him uneasy. The catgut vibrating in the heart, it was like nerves losing their freshness. It was like age coming on, other people's experience battering on the brain. "Where are the rest of the mob?" "In Sam's, drinking." "Why aren't you drinking too?" "I'm not thirsty, Pinky. I wanted some fresh air. This thunder makes you feel queer." "Why don't they stop that bloody noise in there?" the boy said. "You're not going to Sam's?" "I've got a job of work to do," the boy said. "It's all right, Pinky, ain't it? After that verdict, it's all right? Nobody asked questions?" "I just want to be sure," the boy said. "The mob won't stand for any more killing." "Who said there was going to be any more killing?" The lightning flared up and showed his tight, shabby jacket, the bunch of soft hair at the nape. "I've got a date, that's all. You be careful what you say, Spicer. You aren't Milky, are you?" "I'm not Milky. You got me wrong, Pinky. I just don't want another killing. That verdict sort of shook us all. What did they mean by it? We did kill him, Pinky." "We got to go on being careful, that's all." "What did they mean by it, though? I don't trust the doctors. A break like that's too good. We got to be careful. What's in your pocket, Pinky?" "I don't carry a gun," the boy said. "You're fancying things." In the town, the clock struck 11. 3 strokes were lost in the thunder coming down across the channel. "You better be off," the boy said. "She's late already." "You got a razor there, Pinky?" "I don't need a razor with a Polony. If you want to know what it is, it's a bottle." "You don't drink, Pinky." "Nobody would want to drink this." "What is it, Pinky?" "Vitriol," the boy said. "It scares a Polony more than a knife." He turned impatiently away from the sea and complained again. That music! It moaned in his head in the hot electric night. It was the nearest he knew to sorrow, just as faint, secret, sensual pleasure he felt, touching the bottle of vitriol with his fingers as Rose came hurrying up by the concert hall, was his nearest approach to passion. "Get out," he said to Spicer. "She's here." "Oh," Rose said. "I'm late. I've run all the way," she said. "I thought you might have thought—" "I'd have waited," the boy said. "It was an awful night in the cafe," the girl said. "Everything went wrong. I broke 2 plates and the cream was sour. It all came out in a breath." "Who was your friend?" she asked, peering into the darkness. "He don't matter," the boy said. "I thought somehow I couldn't see properly. He don't matter," the boy repeated. "What are we going to do?" "Why, I thought we'd walk a little here first," the boy said, "and then go on somewhere. Sherry's? I don't care." "I'd love Sherry's," Rose said. "You got your money yet for that card?" "Yes, I got it this morning." "Nobody came and asked you questions?" "Oh, no, but wasn't it dreadful his being dead like that?" "You saw his photograph." Rose came close to the rear and peered palely up at the boy. "But it wasn't him. That's what I don't understand." "People look different in photographs." "I've got a memory for faces. It wasn't him. They must have cheated. You can't trust the newspapers." "Come here," the boy said. He drew her around the corner until they were a little farther from the music, more alone, with the lightning on the horizon and the thunder coming closer. "I like you," the boy said, an unconvincing smile forking his mouth. "And I want to warn you. This fellow Hale, I've heard a lot about him. He got himself mixed up with things." "What sort of things?" Rose whispered. "Never mind what things," the boy said. "Only I'd warn you for your own good. You've got the money. If I was you, I'd forget it. Forget all about the fellow who left the card. He's dead, see? You got the money. That's all that matters. Anything you say, Rose said. You can call me Pinky if you like. That's what my friends call me. Pinky, Rose repeated, trying it shyly out as the thunder cracked overhead. You read about Peggy Barron, didn't you? No, Pinky. It was in all the papers. I didn't see any papers till I got this job. We couldn't afford papers at home. She got mixed up with a mob, the boy said, and people came asking her questions. It's not safe. I wouldn't get mixed up with a mob like that, Rose said. You can't always help it. It sort of comes that way. What happened to her? Rose said. They spoilt her looks. She lost one eye. They splashed vitriol on her face. Rose whispered, Vitriol. What's vitriol? And the lightning showed a strut of tarred wood, a wave breaking in her pale, bony, terrified face. You never seen vitriol? The boy said, grinning through the dark. He showed her the little bottle. That's vitriol. He took the cork out and spilled a little on the wooden plank of the pier. It hissed like steam. It burns, the boy said. Smell it. And he thrust the bottle under her nose. She gasped at him. Pinky, you wouldn't. And I wasn't pulling your leg, he said smoothly. That's not vitriol. That's just spirit. I wanted to warn you, that's all. You and me's gonna be friends. I don't want a friend with her skin burned off. You tell me if anyone asks questions. Anyone, mind. Get me on the blower at Frank's straight off. 3 6s. You can remember that. He took her arm and propelled her away from the lonely pier end, back by the lit concert hall, the music drifting landwards, grief in the guts. Pinky, she said, I wouldn't want to interfere. I don't interfere in anyone's business. I've never been nosy. Cross my heart. You're a good kid, he said. You know an awful lot about things, Pinky, she said with horror and admiration. And suddenly, at the stale romantic tune the orchestra was playing, lovely to look at, beautiful to hold, and heaven itself, a little woman of anger and hatred came out on the boy's lips. You've got to know a lot, he said, if you get around. Come on, we'll go to Sherry's. Once off the pier, they had to run for it. Taxis splashed them with water. The strings of colored bulbs down the Hove Parade gleamed like pools of petrol through the rain. They shook the water off to the floor of Sherry's, and Rose saw the queue waiting all the way upstairs for the gallery. It's full, she said, with disappointment. We'll go on to the floor, the boy said, paying his 3 shillings as carelessly as if he went there always, and walked out among the little tables, the dancing partners with bright metallic hair and little black bags, while the colored lights flashed green and pink and blue. Rose said, It's lovely here. It reminds me, and all the way to their table she counted over aloud all the things of which it reminded her. The lights, the tune, the band was playing, the crowd on the floor trying to rumba. She had an immense store of trivial memories, and when she wasn't living in the future, she was living in the past. As for the present, she got through that as quickly as she could, running away from things, running toward things, so that her voice was always a little breathless, her heart pounding at an escape or an expectation. I whipped the plate under the apron, she said. Rose, what are you hiding there? And a moment later, she was turning wide, unfledged eyes back at the boy with a look of the deepest admiration, the most respectful hope. What do you drink? The boy said. She didn't even know the name of a drink. In Nelson Place, from which she had emerged like a mole into the daylight of Snow's restaurant and the Palace Pier, she had never known a boy with enough money to offer her a drink. She would have said beer, but she had no opportunity of discovering whether she liked beer. A 2-penny ice cream from Everest Tricycle was the whole extent of her knowledge of luxury. She goggled hopelessly at the boy. He asked her sharply, What do you like? I don't know what you like. An ice, she said with disappointment, but she couldn't keep him waiting. What kind of ice? Just an ordinary ice, she said. Everest hadn't in all the slum years offered her a choice. Vanilla, the waiter said. She nodded. She supposed that was what she always had, and so it proved, only a size larger. Otherwise, she might just as well have been sucking it between wafers by tricycle. You're a soft sort of kid, the boy said. How old are you? I'm 17, she said, defiantly. There was a law which said a man couldn't go out with you before you were 17. I'm 17 too, the boy said, and the eyes, which had never been young, stared with gray contempt into the eyes which had only just begun to learn a thing or two. He said, "Do you dance?" And she replied humbly, "I haven't danced much." "It don't matter," the boy said. "I'm not one for dancing." He eyed the slow movement of the two backed beasts. Pleasure, he thought. They called it pleasure. He was shaken by a sense of loneliness, an awful lack of understanding. The floor was clear for the last cabaret of the evening. A spotlight picked out a patch of floor, a crooner in a dinner jacket, a microphone on a long black movable stand. He held it tenderly as if it were a woman, swinging it gently this way and that, wooing it with his hips, while from the loudspeaker under the gallery his whisper reverberated hoarsely over the hall, like a dictator announcing victory, like the official news following a long censorship. "It gets you," the boy said. "It gets you," surrendering himself to the huge brazen suggestion. Music talks, talks of our love. The starling of our walks talks, talks of our love. The taxis tooting, the owl hooting, the tube train rumbling, busy bee bumbling, talk of our love. Music talks, talks of our love. The west wind in our walks talks, talks of our love. The nightingale singing, the postman ringing, electric drill groaning, office telephoning, talk of our love. The boy stared at the spotlight. Music, love, nightingale, postman. The words stirred in his brain like poetry. One hand caressed the vitriol bottle in his pocket. The other touched Rose's wrist. The inhuman voice whistled around the gallery, and the boy sat silent. It was time. It was he this time who was being warned. Life held the vitriol bottle and warned him. "I'll spoil your looks." It spoke to him in the music, and when he protested that he, for one, would never get mixed up, the music had its own retort at hand. "You can't always help it. It sort of comes out that way." The watchdog on our walks talks, talks of our love. The crowd stood at attention, 6 deep behind the tables. There wasn't enough room on the floor for so many. They were dead quiet. It was like the anthem of Armistice Day, when the king had deposited his wreath, the hats off, and the troops turned to stone. It was love of a kind, music of a kind, truth of a kind they listened to. Gracie Fields funning, the gangsters gunning, talk of our love. The music peeled on under the Chinese lanterns, and the pink spotlight featured the singer holding the microphone closer to his starched shirt. "You been in love?" the boy asked sharply and uneasily. "Oh, yes," Rose said. The boy retorted with a sudden venom. You would have been. You're green. You don't know what people do." The music came to an end, and in the silence he laughed aloud. "You're innocent." People turned in their chairs and looked at them. A girl giggled. His fingers pinched her wrist. "You're green," he said again. He was working himself into a little sensual rage, as he had done with the soft kids at the council school. "You don't know anything," he said, with contempt in his nails. "Oh, no," she protested. "I know a lot." The boy grinned at her. "Not a thing," pinching the skin on her wrist until his nails clearly met. "You'd like me for your boy, huh? We'll keep company." "Oh," she said, "I'd love it." Tears of pride and pain pricked behind her eyelids. "If you like doing that," she said, "go on." The boy let go. "Don't be soft," he said. "Why shouldn't I like it? You think you know too much," he complained. He sat there, anger like a live coal in his belly, as the music came on again. All the good times he'd had in the old days with nails and splinters, the tricks he'd learned later with a razor blade. "What would be the fun if people didn't squeal?" he said furiously. "We'll be going. I can't stand this place." And obediently Rose began to pack her handbag, putting back her Woolworth compact and her handkerchief. "What's that?" the boy said, when something clinked in her bag. She showed him the end of a string of beads. "You a Roman?" the boy asked. "Yes," Rose said. "I'm one too," said the boy. He gripped her arm and pushed her out into the dark, dripping street. He turned up the collar of his jacket and ran as lightning flapped and the thunder filled the air. They ran from doorway to doorway until they were back on the parade in one of the empty glass shelters. They had it to themselves in the noisy, stifling night. "Why, I was a choir boy once," the boy confided, and suddenly he began to sing softly in his spoilt boy's voice. "Agnus Dei, qui tollis peccata mundi, dona nobis pacem. In his voice, a whole lost world moved. The lighted corner below the organ, the smell of incense and laundered surplices, and the music. Music! It didn't matter what music. Agnus Dei, lovely to look at, beautiful to hold, the startling on our walks, Credo in unum Dominum. Any music moved him, speaking of things he didn't understand. Do you go to Mass? He asked. Sometimes, Rose said. It depends on work. Most weeks I wouldn't get much sleep if I went to Mass. I don't care what you do, the boy said sharply. I don't go to Mass. But you believe, don't you? Rose implored him. You think it's true? Of course it's true, the boy said. What else could there be? He went on scornfully. Why, he said, it's the only thing that fits. These atheists, they don't know nothing. Of course there's hell. Flames and damnation, he said, with eyes on the dark, shifting water and the lightning and lamps going out above the black struts of the palace pier. Torments. And heaven, too, said Rose with anxiety, while the rain fell interminably on. Oh, maybe, the boy said. Maybe. Wet to the skin, the trousers sticking to his thin legs, the boy went up the long, unmatted flight to his bedroom at Frank's. The banister shook under his hand, and when he opened the door and found the mob there, sitting on his brass bedstead, smoking, he said furiously, When's that banister going to be mended? It's not safe. Someone will take a fall some day. The curtain wasn't drawn, the window was open, and the last lightning flapped across the gray roofs, stretching to the sea. The boy went to his bed and swept off the crumbs of Cubit's sausage roll. What's this? He said. A meeting? There's trouble about the subscriptions, Pinky, Cubit said. There's two not come in, Brewer and Tate. They say now Kite's dead. Don't we carve 'em up, Pinky? Dello asked. Spicer stood at the window watching the storm. He said nothing, staring out at the flames and chasms of the sky. That's Spicer, the boy said. He's been doing a lot of thinking lately. They all turned and watched Spicer. Spicer said, Maybe we ought to lay off a while. You know, a lot of the boys cleared out when Kite got killed. Go on, the boy said. Listen to him. He's what they call a philosopher. Well, Spicer said angrily, there's free speech in this mob, ain't it? Those that cleared out, they didn't see how a kid could run this show. The boy sat on the bed, watching him, and with his hands in his damp pockets, he shivered once. I was always against murder, Spicer said. I don't care who knows it. Sour and milky, the boy said. Spicer came into the middle of the room. Listen, Pinky, he said. Be reasonable. He appealed to them all. Be reasonable. There's things in what he says, Cubit suddenly put in. We had a lucky break. We don't want to draw attention to ourselves. We better let Brewer and Tate be for a while. The boy got up, a few crumbs stuck to his wet suit. You ready, Dallo? He said. What you say, Pinky? Dallo said, grinning like a large, friendly dog. Where you going, Pinky? Spicer asked. I'm going to see Brewer, Cubit said. You act as if it was last year we killed Hale, not last week. We got to act cautious. That's over and done, the boy said. You heard the verdict. Natural causes, he said, looking out at the dying storm. You forget that girl in snow. She could hang us. I'm looking after the girl. She won't talk. You're marrying her, aren't you? Cubit said. Dallo laughed. The boy's hands came out of his pocket. The knuckles clenched white. He said, Who told you I was marrying her? Spicer, Cubit said. Spicer backed away from the boy. He said, Listen, Pinky, I only said as it would make her safe. A wife can't give evidence. I don't need to marry a squirt to make her safe. How do we make you safe, Spicer? His tongue came out between his teeth, licking the edges of his dry, cracked lips. If carving do it. It's just a joke, Cubit said. You don't need to take it so solemn. You want a sense of humor, Pinky. You think that was funny, eh? The boy said. Me marrying that cheap Poloni? He croaked. Ha! At them. I'll learn. Come on, Dallo. Wait till morning, Cubit said. Wait till some of the other boys come in. You milky too? You don't believe that, Pinky, but we gotta go slow. You with me, Dallo? The boy asked. I'm with you, Pinky. Then we'll be going, the boy said. He went across to the washstand and opened the little door where the jerry stood. He felt at the back behind the jerry and pulled out a tiny blade, like the blades women shave with, but blunt along the edge and mounted with a sticking plaster. He stuck it under his long thumbnail, the only nail not bitten close, and drew on his glove. he said. We'll be back with the sub in a half hour, and led the way bang straight down Frank's stairs. The cold of his drenching had got under his skin. He came out onto the front a pace ahead of Dallow, his face contorted with ague, a shiver twisting the narrow shoulders. He said over his shoulder to Dallow, "We'll go to Brewer's. One lesson'll be enough." "What you say, Pinky?" Dallow said, plodding after. The rain had stopped. It was low tide, and the shallow edge of the sea scraped far out at the rim of the shingle. A clock struck midnight. Dallow suddenly began to laugh. "What's got you, Dallow?" "I was just thinking," Dallow said. "You're a grand little geezer, Pinky. Kite was right to take you on. You go straight for things, Pinky." "You're all right," the boy said, staring ahead, the ague wringing his face. They passed the Cosmopolitan, the lights on here and there all the way up to the tall front to the turrets against the clouded moving sky. In Snows, when they passed a single light, went out. They turned up the old Stein. Brewer had a house near the tram lines on the Lewes road, almost under the railway viaduct. "He's gone to bed," Dallow said. Pinky rang the bell, holding his finger on the switch. Low shuttered shops off of either hand. A tram went by with nobody in it, labeled Depot Only. Ringing and swinging down the empty road, the conductor drowsing on the seat inside, the roof gleaming from the storm. Pinky kept his finger on the bell. "What made Spicer say that, about me marrying?" the boy asked. "He just thought it'd close her clapper," Dallow said. "She's not what keeps me awake," the boy said, pressing on the bell. A light went on upstairs, a window creaked up, and a voice called, "Who's that?" "It's me," the boy said. "Pinky. What do you want? Why don't you come around in the morning? I want to talk to you, Brewer." "I got nothing to talk about, Pinky. That can't wait." "You better open up, Brewer. You don't want the mob along here." "The old woman's awful sick, Pinky. I don't want any trouble. She's asleep. She hasn't slept for 3 nights." "This'll wake her up," the boy said with his finger on the bell. A slow goods train went by across the viaduct, shaking smoke down into the Lewes road. "Leave off, Pinky, and I'll open up." Pinky shivered as he waited, his gloved hand deep in his damp pocket. Brewer opened the door, a stout elderly man in soiled white pajamas. The bottom button was missing, and the coat swung from the bulging belly and the deep navel. "Come in, Pinky," he said, "and walk quiet. The old woman's bad. I've been worrying my head off." "That why you haven't paid your subscription, Brewer?" the boy said. He looked with contempt down the narrow hall, the shell case converted into an umbrella stand, the moth-eaten stag's head bearing on the one horn a bowler hat, a steel helmet used for ferns. Kite ought to have got them into better money than this. Brewer had only just graduated from the street corner saloon bar betting. A Welsher. It was no good trying to draw more than 10% of his bets. Brewer said, "Come in here and be snug. It's warm in here. What a cold night." He had a hollow, cheery manner, even in pajamas. He was like a legend on the racing card, the old firm. You can trust Bill Brewer. He lit the gas fire, turned on a stand lamp and red silk shade with a bobble fringe. The light glowed on the silver-plated biscuit box, a framed wedding group. "Have a spot of scotch," Brewer invited them. "You know I don't drink," the boy said. "Ted will," Brewer said. "I don't mind a spot," Dallow said. He grinned and said, "Here's how." "We've called for that subscription, Brewer," the boy said. The man in white pajamas hissed soda into a glass. His back turned, he watched Pinky in the glass above the sideboard until he caught the other eye. He said, "I've been worried, Pinky, ever since Kite was croaked." "Well," the boy said, "it's like this. I said to myself, if Kite's mob can't even protect—" He stopped suddenly and listened. "Was that the old woman?" Very faintly from the room above came the sound of coughing. Brewer said, "She's woke up. I gotta go and see her." "You stay here," the boy said, "and talk." "She'll want turning. When we've finished, you can go." Cough, cough, cough. It was like a machine trying to start and failing. Brewer said desperately, "Be human. She won't know where I've got to. I'll only be a minute." "You don't need to be any longer than a minute." "Here," said the boy. "All we want's what's due to us, 20 pounds. I haven't got it in the house. Honest, I haven't." "That's too bad for you." The boy drew off his right glove. "It's like this, Pinky. I paid it all out yesterday to Colleone." "What in Jesus' name," the boy said, "has Colleone to do with it?" Brewer went rapidly and desperately on, listening to the cough, cough, cough upstairs. Be reasonable, Pinky. I can't pay both of you. I'd have been carved if I hadn't paid Colleone. Is he in Brighton? He stopped at the Cosmopolitan. And Tate's paid Colleone too? That's right, Pinky. He's running the business in a big way. A big way. It was like an accusation, a reminder of the brass bedstead at Frank's, the crumbs on the mattress. You think I'm finished, the boy said. Take my advice, Pinky, and go in with Colleone. The boy suddenly drew his hand back and slashed his razor nail with Brewer's cheek. He struck blood out along the cheekbone. Don't, Brewer said. Don't. Backing against the sideboard, upsetting the biscuit box, he said, I've got protection. You be careful. I've got protection. The boy laughed. Dallow refilled his glass with Brewer's whiskey. The boy said, Look at him. He's got protection. Dallow took a splash of soda. You want any more? The boy said. That was just to show you who's protecting you. I can't pay both of you, Pinky. God's sake, keep back. 20 pounds is what we've come for, Brewer. Colleone will have my blood, Pinky. You needn't worry. We'll protect you. Cough, cough, cough went the woman upstairs, and then a faint cry like a sleeping child's. She's calling me, Brewer said. 20 pounds. I don't keep my money in here. Let me fetch it. You go with him, Dallow, the boy said. I'll wait here. And he sat down on a straight carving dining room chair and stared out. The mean street, the dustbins along the pavement, the vast shadow of the viaduct. He sat perfectly still with his great, ancient eyes giving away nothing. A big way. Colleone come into a big way. He knew there wasn't a soul in the mob he could trust, except perhaps Dallow. That didn't matter. You couldn't make mistakes when you trusted nobody. The cat coasted cautiously around a bin on the pavement, stopped suddenly, crouched back, and in the semi-dark in its agate eyes stared up at the boy. Boy and cat, they didn't stir, watching each other until Dallow returned. I've got the money, Pinky, Dallow said. The boy turned his head and grinned at Dallow. Suddenly his face convulsed. He sneezed twice, violently. Overhead the coughing died away. He won't forget this visit, Dallow said. He added anxiously, You ought to have a spot of whiskey, Pinky. You caught cold. I'm all right, the boy said. He got up. We won't stop and say goodbye. The boy led the way down the middle of the empty road between the tram lines. He said suddenly, Do you think I'm finished, Dallow? You? Dallow said. Why, you haven't even begun. They walked for a while in silence. The water from the gutters dripped on the pavement. Then Dallow spoke. You worrying about Colleone? I'm not worrying, Dallow said suddenly. You're worth a dozen Colleones. The Cosmopolitan, he exclaimed and spat. Kite thought he'd go in for automatic machines. He learned different. Now Colleone thinks the coast is clear. He's branching out. He ought to have learned from Hale. Hale died natural. Dallow laughed. Tell that to Spicer. They turned the corner by the Royal Albion, and the sea was with them again. The tide had turned, a movement, a splashing, a darkness. The boy looked suddenly sideways up at Dallow. He could trust Dallow, receiving from the ugly and broken face a sense of triumph and companionship and superiority. He felt as a physically weak but cunning schoolboy feels who's attached himself to an indiscriminating fidelity to the strongest boy in the school. You mug, he said, and pinched Dallow's arm. It was almost like affection. A light still burned in Frank's, and Spicer was waiting in the hall. Anything happen? He asked anxiously. His pale face had come out with spots around the mouth and nose. What do you think? The boy said, going on upstairs. We brought the subscription. Spicer followed into the bedroom. There was a call for you just after you'd gone. Who from? A girl called Rose. The boy sat on the bed, undoing his shoe. What did she want? She said while she was out with you, somebody had been in asking for her. The boy sat still with a shoe in his hand. Pinky, Spicer said. Was it the girl from Snow's? Of course it was. I answered the phone, Pinky. Did she know your voice? How do I know, Pinky? Who was asking for her? She didn't know. She said tell you because you wanted to hear. Pinky, suppose the bogies got that far. The bogies aren't as smart as that, Pinky said. Maybe it's one of Colleone's men poking around after their pal Fred. He took off his other shoe. You don't need to turn milky, Spicer. It was a woman, Pinky. I'm not troubling. Fred died natural. That's the verdict. You can forget it. There's other things to think of now. He put his shoes side by side under the bed, took off his coat, hung it on a bed ball, took off his trousers, lay back his pants and shirt on top of the bed. "I'm thinking, Spicer, you ought to take a holiday. You look all in. I wouldn't want anyone seeing you like that." He closed his eyes. "You be off, Spicer, and take things easy. If that girl ever knew who put the card—" "She'll never know. Turn out the light and get—" The light went out, and the moon went on like a lamp outside, slanting across the roofs, laying the shadow of clouds across the downs, illuminating the white empty stands of the race course above Whiteshank Bottom like monoliths of Stonegate, shining across the tide, which drove up from Boulogne and washed against the piles of the palace pier. It lit the washstand, the open door where the jerry stood, the brass balls of the bed end. Chapter 2. The boy lay on the bed. A cup of coffee went cold on the washstand, and the bed was sprinkled with flakes of pastry. The boy licked an indelible pencil. His mouth was stained purple at the corners. He wrote, "Refer you to my previous letter," and concluded it at last. "P. Brown, Secretary, the Bookmaker's Protection." The envelope addressed Mr. J. Tate lay on the washstand, the corners soiled with coffee. When he had finished writing, he put his head back on the pillow and closed his eyes. He fell asleep at once. It was like the falling of a shutter, the pressure of the bulb which ends at time exposure. He had no dreams. His sleep was functional. When Dallow opened the door, he woke at once. "Well," he said, lying there without moving, fully dressed among the pastry crumbs. "There's a letter for you, Pinky. Judy brought it up." The boy took the letter. Dallow said, "It's an elegant letter, Pinky. Smell it." The boy held the mauve envelope to his nose. It smelt like a catsup for a bad breath. He said, "Can't you keep off that bitch? If Frank knew—" "Who'd be writing an elegant letter like that, Pinky?" "Colleoni. He wants me to call in for a talk at the Cosmopolitan." "The Cosmopolitan," Dallow repeated with disgust. You won't go, will you?" "Of course I'll go. It's not the sort of place where you'd feel at home." "Elegant," the boy said. "Like this notepaper. Costs lots of money. He thinks he can scare me." "Perhaps we'd better lay off Tate. Take the jacket down to Frank. Tell him to sponge it quick and put an iron over it. Give these shoes a brush." He kicked them out from under his bed and sat up. "He thinks he'll have the laugh on us." In the tipped mirror on the washstand he could see himself, but his eyes shifted quickly from the image of the smooth, never-shaven cheek, soft hair, old eyes. He wasn't interested. He had too much pride to worry about his appearance. So that later he was quite at ease, waiting in the great lounge under the domed lights for Colleoni. Young men kept on arriving in huge motoring coats, accompanied by small tinted creatures who rang like expensive glass when they were touched, but who conveyed an impression of being as sharp and as tough as tin. They looked at nobody, sweeping through the lounge as they swept in racing models down the Brighton Road, ending on high stools in the American bar. A stout woman in a white fox fur came out on a lift and stared at the boy. Then she got back into the lift again and moved weightily upwards. A little bitch sniffed at him and then talked him over with another little bitch on a settee. Mr. Colleoni came across the acre of a deep carpet from the Louis C's writing room, walking on tiptoe in glacé shoes. He was small, with a neat round belly. He wore a gray, double-breasted waistcoat, and his eyes gleamed like raisins. His hair was thin and gray. The little bitches on the settee stopped talking as he passed and concentrated. He clinked very gently as he moved. It was the only sound. "You were asking for me?" he said. "You asked for me," the boy said. "I got your letter." "Surely," Mr. Colleoni said, making a little bewildered motion with his hands. "You are not Mr. P. Brown." He explained. "I expected someone a good deal older." "You asked for me," the boy said. The little raisin eyes took him in, the sponge suit and the narrow shoulders, the cheap black shoes. "I thought Mr. Kite's dead," the boy said. "You know that." "I missed it," Mr. Colleoni said. "Of course, that makes a difference." "You can talk to me," the boy said, instead of Kite. Mr. Colleoni smiled. "I don't think it's necessary," he said. "You'd better," the boy said. Little chimes of laughter came from the American bar and the chink-chink of glass and ice. A page came out of the Louis Seize writing room, called Sir Joseph Montague, and passed into the Pompadour boudoir. The spot of damp where Frank's iron had failed to pass above the boy's breast pocket was slowly fading out in the hot cosmopolitan air. Mr. Corleone put out a hand and gave him a quick pat, pat, pat on the arm. "Come with me," he said. He led the way, walking on glacé tiptoe shoes, past the settee where the bitches whispered, past a little table where a man was saying, "I told him 10,000's my limit," to an old man who sat with closed eyes above his chilling tea. Mr. Corleone looked over his shoulder and said gently, The service here is not what it used to be." He looked into the Louis XVI writing room. A woman in mauve with an untimely tiara was writing a letter in a vast jumble of chinoiserie. Mr. Corleone withdrew. "We'll go where we can talk in peace," he said, and tiptoed back across the lounge. The old man had opened his eyes and was testing his tea with his finger. Mr. Corleone led the way to the gilt grill of the lift. "Number 15, he said. They rose angelically toward peace. "Cigar?" Mr. Corleone asked. "I don't smoke," the boy said. The last squeal of gaiety came from below from the American bar, the last syllable of the page boy returning from the Pompadour boudoir. Gueux before the gates slid back, and they were in the padded, soundproof passage. Mr. Corleone paused and lit his cigar. "Let's have a look at that lighter," the boy said. Mr. Corleone's small, shrewd eyes shone blankly under the concealed, pervasive electric glow. He held it out. The boy turned it over, looking at the hallmark. "Real gold," he said. "I like things good," Mr. Corleone said, unlocking a door. "Take a chair." The armchairs, stately red velvet couches, stamped with crowns in gold and silver thread, faced the wide seaward windows and the wrought iron balconies. "Have a drink?" "I don't drink," the boy said. "Now," Mr. Corleone said, "who sent you?" "No one sent me." "I mean, who's running your mob if Kite's dead?" "I'm running it," the boy said. Mr. Corleone politely checked a smile, tapping his thumbnail with the gold lighter. "What happened to Kite?" "You know that story," the boy said. He gazed across the Napoleonic crowns of silver thread. "You won't want to hear the details. It wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been crossed. A journalist thought he could put one over on us." "What journalist that?" "You ought to read the inquest," the boy said, staring out through the window at the pale arc of a sky against which a few light clouds blew up. Mr. Corleone looked at the ash on his cigar. It was half an inch long. He sat deep down in his armchair and crossed his little plump thighs contentedly. "I'm not saying anything about Kite," the boy said. "He trespassed." "You mean," Mr. Corleone said, "you aren't interested in automatic machines?" "I mean," the boy said, "that trespassing's not healthy." A little wave of musk came over the room from the handkerchief of Mr. Corleone's breast pocket. "It'd be you who'd need protection," the boy said. "I've got all the protection I need," Mr. Corleone said. He shut his eyes. He was snug. The huge moneyed hotel lapped him around. He was at home. The boy sat on the edge of the chair because he didn't believe in relaxing during business hours. It was he who looked like an alien in this room, not Mr. Corleone. "You're wasting your time, my child," Mr. Corleone said. "You can't do me any harm." He laughed gently. "If you want a job, though, come to me. I like push. I dare say I could find room for you. The world needs young people with energy." The hand with the cigar moved expansively, mapping out the world as Mr. Corleone visualized it. Lots of little electric clocks controlled by Greenwich, buttons on a desk, a good suite on the first floor, accounts audited, reports from agents, silver cutlery, glass. "I'll be seeing you on the course," the boy said. "You'll hardly do that," Mr. Corleone said. "I haven't been to the race course, let me see, in the last 20 years. There wasn't a point," he seemed to be indicating, fingering his gold lighter, "at which their worlds touched. The weekend at the Cosmopolitan, the portable dictaphone beside his desk, and not the smallest connection with Kite, slashed quickly with razors on a railway platform, the grubby hand against the skyline signaling to the bookie from the stand, the heat, the dust fuming up over the half-crown enclosure, the smell of bottled beer. "I'm just a businessman," Mr. Corleone softly explained. "I don't need to see a race, and nothing you might try to do to my men could affect me. I got 2 in the hospital now. It doesn't matter. They have the best attention. Flowers, grapes, I can afford it. I don't have to worry. I'm a businessman," Mr. Corleone went on, expensively and good-humoredly. "I like you. You're a promising youngster, That's why I'm talking to you like a father. You can't damage a business like mine." "I could damage you," the boy said. "It wouldn't pay. There wouldn't be any faked alibis for you. It would be your witness who'd be scared. I'm a businessman." The raisin eyes blinked at the sun slanted in across a bowl of flowers and fell on the deep carpet. "Napoleon III used to have this room," Mr. Corleone said. "And Eugenie." "Who was she?" "Oh," Mr. Corleone said vaguely, "one of those foreign Polonies." He plucked a flower and stuck it in his buttonhole, and something a little doggish peeped out of the black buttony eyes, a hint of Serglio. "I'll be going," the boy said. He rose and moved to the door. "You do understand me, don't you?" Mr. Corleone said, without moving. Holding his hand very still, he kept his cigar ash quite a long ash now suspended. "Brewer's been complaining. You don't do that again. And Tate? You mustn't try any tricks with Tate." His old Italian face showed few emotions, but a mild amusement, a mild friendliness, but suddenly sitting there in the rich Victorian room with the gold lighter in his pocket and his cigar case on his lap, he looked as a man might look who owned the whole world, the whole visible world, that is, the cash registers and the policemen, and the prostitutes' parliament and the laws which say, this is right and that is wrong. "I understand all right," the boy said. "You think your mob's too small for you." "I employ a great many people," Mr. Corleone said. The boy closed the door. A loose shoelace tapped all the way down the passage. The huge lounge was almost empty. A man in +4s waited for a girl. The visible world was all Mr. Corleone's. The spot where the iron hadn't passed was still a little damp over the boy's breast. A hand touched the boy's arm. He looked around and recognized the man in the bowler hat. He nodded guardedly. "Morning." "They told me at Frank's," the man said, "you'd come here." The boy's heart missed a beat. For almost the first time it occurred to him that the law could hang him, take him out in a yard, drop him in a pit, bury him in lime, put an end to the great future. "You want me?" "That's right," he thought. Rose, the girl, someone asking questions. His memory flashed back. He remembered how she caught him with his hand under the table, feeling for something. He grinned dully and said, "Well, they haven't sent the Big Four anyway." "Mind coming round to the station?" "Got a warrant?" "It's only Brewer's been complaining you hit him. You left your scar all right." The boy began to laugh. "Brewer? Me? I wouldn't touch him." "Come round and see the inspector." "Course I will." They came out onto the parade. A pavement photographer saw them coming and lifted the cap of his camera. The boy put his hand in front of his face and went by. "You ought to put a stop to those things," he said. "Fine thing it'd be to have a picture postcard stuck up on the pier you and me walk into the station." "They caught a murderer once in town with one of those snaps." "Yeah, I read about it," the boy said, and fell silent. This is Corleone's doing, he thought. He's showing off. He put Brewer up to this. "Brewer's wife's pretty bad, they say," the detective remarked softly. "Is she?" the boy said. "I wouldn't know." "Got your alibi ready, I suppose?" "How do I know? I don't know when he said I hit him. The geezer can't have an alibi for every minute of the day." "You're a wise kid," the detective said. "But you needn't get fussed up about this. The inspector wants to have a friendly chat, that's all." He led the way through the charge room. A man with a tired, aging face sat behind the desk. "Sit down, Brown," he said. He opened a cigarette box and pushed it across. "I don't smoke," the boy said. He sat down and watched the inspector alertly. "Aren't you going to charge me?" "There's no charge," the inspector said. Brewer thought better of it. He paused. He looked more tired than ever, and said, "I want to talk straight for once. We know more about each other than we admit. I don't interfere with you and Brewer. I've got more important things to do than prevent you and Brewer arguing. But you know just as well as I do that Brewer wouldn't come here to complain if he hadn't been put up to it." "You've certainly got ideas," the boy said. "Put up to it by someone who's not afraid of your mob." There's not much that escapes the bogies," the boy said, grimacing derisively. "The races start next week, and I don't want to have any big-scale mob fighting in Brighton. I don't mind you carving each other up in a quiet way. I don't give a penny for your worthless skins. But when two mobs start scraping, people who matter may get hurt." "Meaning who?" the boy said. meaning decent, innocent people, poor people out to put a shilling on the tote, clerks, charwomen, dustmen, people who wouldn't be seen dead talking to you or to Colleone. What are you getting at? The boy said. I'm getting at this. You aren't big enough for your job, Brown. You can't stand against Colleone. If there's any fighting, I shall come down like a ton of bricks on both of you. But it will be Colleone who'll have the alibis. No one's going to fake you an alibi against Colleone. You take my advice. Clear out of Brighton. Fine, the boy said. A bogey doing Colleone's job for him. This is private and unofficial, the inspector said. I'm being human for once. I don't care if you get carved or Colleone gets carved, but I'm not going to have innocent people hurt if I can help it. You think I'm finished? The boy said. He grinned uneasily, looking at the walls plastered with notices. Dog licenses, gun licenses, found round. A dead face met his eyes staring from the wall, unnaturally pasty, unbrushed hair, a scar by the mouth. You think Colleone will keep peace better? He could read the writing. 1 nickel watch waistcoat of gray cloth, blue striped shirt, Artex vest, Artex pants. Well, it's valuable advice, the boy said, grinning down at the police polished desk. The box of players, a crystal paperweight. I'll have to think it over. I'm young to retire. You're too young to run a racket, if you ask me. So Brewer's not bringing a charge? He's not afraid to. I talked him out of it. I wanted to have a chance to speak to you straight. Well, the boy said, standing up. Maybe I'll be seeing you, maybe not. He grinned again, passing through the charge room, but a bright spot of color stood on each cheekbone. There was poison in his veins, though he grinned and bore it. He had been insulted. He was going to show the world. They thought, because he was only 17, he jerked his narrow shoulders back at the memory that he'd killed this man. And his bogies who thought they were clever weren't clever enough to discover that. He trailed the clouds of his own glory after him. Hell lay about him in his infancy. He was ready for more deaths.